A very good evening to one and all. So when I introduce myself as an IAS officer, it is more often than not usually assumed that I meant to say IAS, and probably I just didn't pronounce it correctly. Then I would go on to emphasize the E in the IAS, and then people would say, okay, maybe she means Indian Engineering Services. And no, I will then again go on to say that no, I am from the Indian Economic Service. And you know, initially when I joined the service, I used to get very sad when I had to explain this with the rider to people. But as I kind of gained some experience in the government, I now kind of understand why that happens. So what do we think usually? When we think of government, we usually think of government's presence in an administrative role, in police department, in tax collections, in urban planning, in maybe education policy planning. But the economics behind all those policies do not clearly basically enter in the scheme of things. It is something that is behind the scenes. Hopefully, by the end of this lecture, this not so obvious relationship between administrators and economists, policies and economics should become very clear. Let me give you some background about the IES. This is Indian Economic Service, which was instituted long back in 1961 by the government to basically bring about an in-house core capacity to undertake economic analysis, to give policy advice on policies, to work on development policies. So the government did recognize the need for economic analysis, the need for economics behind the policies long back. And in fact, the role of economics in the policy making has increased tremendously over the last many years. So to basically give this exam, you have to be someone who has studies economics, so somebody who has a specialization in economics. So there comes the catch. I would not have been standing in front of you today giving this talk as an IES officer had it not been for my mom who is present in the audience today. I'll tell you why. So I basically, in 10th class, I did secure good marks in my board exams. I was the third topper of my school. All of my friends were taking science. I thought, why not? Didn't consult my mother or father about it, filled the form, went ahead, said, I'll take science. So, but there was a catch. You had to fill an optional form. I don't know what the norm is now, but with science, physics, chemistry, maths, English, you had to choose one optional paper. And the optional paper was physical education, computer science, and among all these options, there was economics. I thought, let me take physical education for two reasons. I was somewhat of a sports enthusiast at that time. Secondly, I thought it would be slightly easier to do one non-technical paper. So I filled the form accordingly, went home. My father was traveling. So I showed the form to my mom and said, please sign it. I need to submit it to the school. Somehow, I never expected this, but somehow she was not happy with the choice I had taken. I said, why? She said, one of my friends has told me that economics is a very upcoming subject. It has a lot of opportunities. And then we tried and argue. Me being the young belligerent self at that time wasn't very happy with her that she's trying to not support me in what I want to do and whatnot. To the extent that she actually went to my school, met my economics teacher, made her party to this decision, and they both eventually convinced me to take economics. Cut down to 2 years. I fell so much in love with the subject that I would spend most of the time studying economics and not the main science subjects I had. And then I decided to pursue economics, not just for my 11th and 12th, but for my graduation, for my post-graduation, and then decided to make a career out of it. And that is how I landed up today, giving this session to all of you about public policy. So I did join the Indian Economic Service in 2013. After I was selected, there is we have a long training of about 16 months, which begins with a foundation course. And in the foundation course, actually sets the foundation for policy making. We do this course with people across different services, and do get a flavor of how people interact and make government policies. Then we go on to get our training in various institutes across the country, starting from National Law University in Bangalore, National Institute of Financial Management, JPAL, and many more. The training also has a component of getting attached with the Singapore Civil Service College to get an idea of how the analysis is done in other countries. So anyways, once my training ended, I was always very excited to work in Ministry of Finance, and I got lucky. I got a posting, and I was posted as an assistant director in Ministry of Finance. It has been a journey of more than 7 years, a very rewarding, challenging, and enriching journey where I did get to work on numerous policies, and I was lucky enough to participate in lots of discussions which actually became economic policies and on ground made some difference. Now, this brings me to the topic of the day. The topic of my talk is economics and public policy. I'm sure most of you have heard public policy. Have you all ever heard about this term, public policy, students? I see very few hands. Okay, I see some hands now. So public policy does seem a very common term when we think like that. But if you go back today and Google what is public policy, you'll see that you see n number of definitions that come up. You'll see a Wikipedia page where you'll get how different people define public policy. And I used to think, why does that happen? That happens because this public policy itself is a very, very broad concept. It is something that spans n number of areas. It's something that is not tangible, but it does impact everybody's life, one and all. Maybe how the seating arrangement was done because of COVID protocol. Maybe how we park our cars, traffic regulation, how your school curriculum is decided, education policy. So public policy is present everywhere. However, since it is not tangible, we find it very difficult to define. We in the Department of Economic Affairs do contribute a lot to the economic analysis of what goes behind public policy. I'm very nervous to make these statements here with you, sir, being present here, who is a very senior of ours in Niti Aayog. But we've had the privilege of working and giving economic analysis for a lot of economic policies. What I like to do here is give you a couple of examples for the policies that I have myself worked on to give you an idea of how basically, the simple economics that some of you may be learning today or maybe end up learning in colleges do in fact play an important role when a public policy is made. So again, since there is not one single definition, but broadly a public policy ranges from the sets of decisions that a government takes for the country in various spheres of life, right? So let's take about two very, very broad examples. A government definitely does have two agendas. One is promoting growth, and second is promoting equity in the society. So I'll give you two examples of the policies or economic analysis that we did undertake basically on both of these themes. Let me start with growth. So economic growth is important, that we all know. And each government has in its agenda to take actions, undertake policies to promote economic growth. But again, as basic principles of economics tell us that the resources that the government has or the resources that can be generated are limited. So even if the government would like to do anything and everything possible to promote growth, there is a choice that has to be made there. So what is the choice? As a policy maker, we have to make a choice to take a decision which is in the best interest of all, and secondly, is able to reap the maximum benefits. So for instance, we did this, and incidentally, the department I work in, the team I work in, does prepare a document called Economic Survey, which is a flagship document, which is a key document of Ministry of Finance, and contains analysis on different aspects of economy and economic analysis for a lot of policies, and also goes about giving suggestions for policies that should be undertaken to basically tackle the current challenges. So for my first economic survey that we did in 2014-15, I did work on that survey just a few months into the service. So there was a chapter we did, basically the case for investing more in railways. So anecdotally, we all know that more public investment in infrastructure will be good. It will have a multiplier effect on other sectors and promote growth. We had the task of kind of defining and gauging what will be the impact of it. So what we did was use the concept given by Albert Hirschman, the backward and forward linkages that he's given this concept called backward and forward linkages. So we did calculate that if you put some money in railways, so if you put 1 rupee in railways, what are the kinds of benefits that it generates for the economy? Because it was not just going to benefit that sector, it has impacts in other sectors. So when you put money in railways, construction will be demanding inputs from other services, other sectors that will create that demand. And then railway services will be used by other sectors which will again be beneficial to them. So this is something that is called as a positive spillover effect. So we did that analysis and came up with a policy recommendation that the impact of investment in railways is, so the linkages, the total linkages of investment in railways is much, much higher than 1. So yes, when you do higher investment in railways and this kind of infrastructure, it has a sound economic logic. That policy has a sound economic logic. It will generate more economic benefits than the amount of money you're putting in the railway sector. Let's take another example. On the equity side, it is very clear that in any country there will be a section of population which is not as well off as maybe the rest. And it is government's responsibility to do support that section in whatever way they can. Now there can be various ways in which the government can support that section. One of that ways is subsidy. As a lot of you may be aware, in India we do provide subsidy on kerosene, cooking gas, and many other commodities. So this is very clear that yes, you do need to support this section of the society that maybe is not well off. You do need to support them, but again, since the resources are limited, there has to be a discussion, there has to be an analysis. This is a dilemma for policymakers because they have to decide what to subsidize, because you have to decide who will it actually benefit, how will it actually benefit the poor. So again, I was involved in an exercise that we did a few years ago on this, where we were asked to analyze as to which commodities, when we are subsidizing, how well that subsidy is being targeted. So again, there can be many ways of doing this, but in a country like India, where with a huge population, it may not be possible for anybody to do a complete census or a complete survey of the entire country every time a policy is being taken. So we did a simple exercise. We thought, okay, let's decide what is the target population. And we thought that if this subsidy is able to benefit the bottom 30 or 40% people in the society, we'll consider this to be a well-targeted subsidy. And then now what that commodity should be that you subsidize. So one way to think about it is that the commodities that are more important for this target population. So we did calculate the expenditure on these commodities that we are thinking about subsidizing by our target group population. So you will see that things like food, kerosene oil, cooking gas, these do come up in that calculation because everybody, specifically the people who in the bottom section, are spending a large proportion of their budget on that. And what will be the basically cost? The cost will be something that the benefit is going to the population whom you have not actually targeted, whom the subsidy is not actually meant for. So if, let's say, I subsidize a commodity on which basically people who don't really need that subsidy, who are not in your target population, are spending more, their share of consumption of that commodity is high. That means maybe you are not able to target your subsidy well. This may not be the only example of doing this analysis, but this is just to give you an idea that when you see when you see a policy outcome, there is some kind of economic analysis that does go behind, does happen in the background of these policies. I hope with these examples, at least I'm able to convince you that economists do indeed have a role in the government, if nothing else. So we basically do work on all of these economic policies, and the icing on the cake for some of us who are basically doing some background analytical work on these policies is when some of these policies are actually implemented and do bring about some change on ground. When you see some of those are being implemented and are able to make a difference. So I'd like to end my talk assuming that I have been able to inspire some of the bright young minds that I see at the back sitting today to basically join the government, do engage in public policy making, and at least some of you to join the IES. Thank you.